Hey guys, I am T and welcome to the channel. If you're new here, we make trendy and fun crochet tutorials twice a week, and if you haven't already, smash that like button, drop a comment below, and subscribe to join in on the fun. For today's tutorial, there's more modern mock neck goodness. This time with a peasant top twist, and if it wasn't enough, a flirtatious cutout to set it over the top. Speaking of, if you're looking to take your crochet skills to the next level, you are in the right place. We have hundreds of modern crochet tutorials and patterns, with more coming weekly, so consider clicking the bell to subscribe and you'll never miss an upload. Also, do me a huge favor and give this video a big thumbs up if you like it, or 2 thumbs down if you don't. Either way, it's a great way to show support so I can keep putting out free tutorials every Wednesday and Sunday. Now it's time to get on the show, so without further ado. For this project, any category 4 yarn will work, but I used a total of 225 grams of yarn, and that's 425 yards if you're stateside. As for tools, a 5mm hook, scissors, stitch markers, and tape measure. There is a written pattern down below. Use offer code TCDDIY for a discount off any $9.99 plus order, and enter this week's pattern giveaway by telling us if you prefer tortilla or potato chips. I definitely love both, but I think I'm more of a potato chip gal. Details for the giveaway down below. We are using 4 stitches for this project, and they'll be as follows. Chain, slip stitch, single crochet, and half double crochet. This tutorial is made for a size small, but you can adjust it for your size, and we explain how to in the video, so let's get started. Getting this top started, we're all going to grab our category 4 yarn and make a slip knot. Then we're all going to grab our 5mm hook and start off by making a chain that starts 1 inch underneath our underarm down to where you like the bottom of this top to be, so you can make this cropped or full length. I'd like for mine to be full length, so I'm going to start by making a chain 60, and that's 14 inches or 36 centimeters. Now that we have our chain, we're all going to get started on our row 1. It's going to be a half double crochet row, so block off that last chain and do a chain 2. That chain 2 does not count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then to do our half double crochet, we're all going to yarn over. Insert your hook into that chain that we blocked off, or the 3rd chain from our hook. Pull through for 3 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through all 3. Once more, yarn over. Into that following chain, pull through all 3. Continue with 1 half double crochet into every chain, leaving the last one. We are back. We have just put 1 half double crochet into every chain, leaving the last one, and now we're going to close off the row with an increase of 2 half double crochets. So yarn over, and into that last chain, insert with 1 half double, and then into that same last chain with a 2nd half double crochet. Now our following row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row. So to get that started, we're all going to chain 1, flip our work. That chain 1 doesn't count as a stitch, that's our turning chain, and just put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So we're all going to start by finding that first stitch from our previous row, knot into that chain. We're going to insert into that back loop, then yarn over and gently pull through both of those loops that's on our hook. Again, into that next stitch, insert into that back loop, or the loop that's furthest away from us. Yarn over, pull through everything. Continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And we do want to make sure that we're not tugging too tightly after every stitch, otherwise the following row can be too tight to work into. We are back and we have just finished up our row number 2, which was our back loop slip stitch row. Now from here, we're going to repeat our 2 previous rows. So now it's going to be a back loop half double crochet row and then a back loop slip stitch row. So let's just get started on the following back loop half double crochet row together. From where we're at, let's all chain 2 and flip. All we're going to do is our regular half double crochets, but now within the back loops. So yarn over, find the last stitch from our previous row and insert into that back loop, or the loop that's furthest away from us. Pull through all 3. Pretty simple. Continue with 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one so we can increase together once more. We are back. We now have 1, 2, 3 rows nearly finished. Into the last stitch, into the end of the row 3, we're going to do an increase of 2 back loop half doubles. So yarn over, into that next stitch, insert into that back loop with 1 back loop half double, and then into that same stitch with a second back loop half double. From here, our following row is going to be a back loop slip stitch row, so chain 1, flip your work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. From here, we're going to be repeating our 2 previous rows. So back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases, and then a back loop half double crochet row that ends on an increase of 2 back loop half doubles until we have an underarm portion that reaches from mid underarm over to the corner of our underarm. And we do want to make sure that we're stretching it as if we're wearing it, and I'll meet you back right after a back loop slip stitch row so we can continue on with the rest of our underarm from there. We are back. The first half of my underarm is complete. I have a total of 4 rows, and my width is now about 1.5 inches or 4 centimeters unstretched. Now what we're going to do from here is still more underarm rows, but with more of an increase along the top to get a really smooth curve. So since we should all be along the bottom, we're going to be putting 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last one so we can do an increase of 3 together now. We've made our way down with our back loop half double crochets, left that last stitch, and now we're all going to do an increase of 3 back loop half doubles together. So yarn over, into that stitch's last back loop with 1 back loop half double, into that same back loop with a second, and then into that same back loop with a third. Now that's how we're going to be closing off our half double crochet rows for this portion. And now we're going to do a slip stitch row, but that slip stitch row is going to have an increase as well. So now what we're going to do is chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a stitch, and then that second chain is going to count as our turning chain, and then flip our work. Then all we're going to do from here is put 1 back loop slip stitch into the second chain from our hook. So we're going to skip that first one, and into that second one, insert into that back loop, and insert with 1 back loop slip stitch. Then from here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now from here, all we're going to do is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So that's going to be a back loop half double crochet row that now ends on an increase of 3 back loop half doubles, and then a back loop slip stitch row that starts with an increase the same way that we just did. Continue to repeat these 2 rows until we have an underarm portion that can stretch from mid underarm now over to the front of our body, roughly where a bra strap or a tank top strap would be. And then I'll meet you back right after a back loop half double crochet row so we can get started on the neckline. Alright, so we are back. I am finished up with my underarm portion. I have a total of 9 rows. My width is roughly 2.5 inches or 7 centimeters unstretched. Now what we're going to do from here is the neckline. So first things first, we're all going to want to make sure that we're inserting our stitch marker into the top of this last underarm row, so the side half double crochet row. And now what we're going to do from here is chain 1 and flip our work. Now we're all going to be doing the following row in our row sequence, which is going to be a back loop slip stitch row, but now it's going to start with a decrease of 2 back loop slip stitches. So to get that started, we're all going to insert our hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through. Also insert your hook into that second stitch's back loop. Once we have those 3 loops on our hook, yarn over, pull through all 3. Let's do that again. Then from here, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So into that next stitch's back loop, pull through, next stitch's back loop, and pull through. Continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into the rest of our stitches. At the end of the row, chain 2, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 2 stitches. Alright, so we are back. We have finished up our first back loop slip stitch row for our neckline and made our way back up with our back loop half doubles, leaving the last 2 stitches. And now we're going to do a decrease of 2 back loop half doubles. So yarn over into that second to last stitch, pull through into that following stitch, pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 loops on our hook. Then we're going to yarn over and pull through all 4. And that's it. From here, we're just going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So it's going to be a back loop slip stitch row that starts with a decrease of 2, and then a back loop half double crochet row that ends on a decrease of 2 until we have a portion that can stretch over to mid chest. And then I'll meet you back right after a half double crochet row. Alright, so we are back and the first half of my neckline is finished. I have a total of 21 rows and my width is roughly 5 inches or 13 centimeters unstretched, and now we're going to do our middle row, which is going to be a slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases. So from where we're at, we should have all ended right after a half double crochet row. We're going to chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So our middle row isn't going to have any increases or decreases. Then at the end of our middle row, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, making our way all the way back up. And then I'll meet you back so we can basically mirror everything we did here on the other side. Alright, we are back. Our middle row is complete, and now we made our way up with our back loop half double crochet row, leaving that last stitch, and now we're going to do an increase of 2 back loop half doubles. So that's going to be the same way that we started off our underarm portion. So just yarn over and into that last stitch's back loop with 2 back loop half doubles. So there's 1, and then there's 2. Now in order to mirror this side, on this side we're going to have to increase into our slip stitch row as well. So how that's going to work is we're going to chain 2 now. That first chain is going to count as a stitch. That second chain is going to count as a chain, basically the same way that we increased our slip stitch portion for the second half of our underarm. And now that we have that chain 2, we're all going to flip our work. Into that second chain from our hook, we're going to be inserting into that back loop and gently pull through everything, and that's it. From here, continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. From here, we're going to continue to repeat our 2 previous rows. So that is a back loop half double crochet row that ends on an increase of 2, and then a back loop slip stitch row that has an increase within it as well for the same amount of rows that we did for the neckline's decrease portion, not including our middle row. And then I'll meet you guys back once we have the same amount of rows so we can get started on the underarm portion together. Alrighty, so we are back. The increase portion of my neckline is complete. I now have a total of 34 rows. My width is 8 inches or 20 centimeters unstretched, and now we're going to get started on our underarm. So since we all should have ended along the bottom, we're going to chain 2, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, leaving the last 3. Alright, so to finish up our first underarm row, we should have put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, and into the last 3 stitches, we're all going to do a decrease of 3 back loop half doubles. So yarn over, insert your hook into that third to last back loop, pull through, second to last back loop, pull through, and last back loop, pull through for a total of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 loops on our hook. Then yarn over, pull through all 5 of those loops. That is our decrease of 3 back loop half doubles. Then to match the second underarm portion that we had on the other side, since we did an increase into those slip stitch rows, we're going to have to do a decrease into the following slip stitch row as well. So we're all going to chain 1 and flip our work, but right before we flip our work, we are all going to want to make sure that we're inserting our stitch marker into the top of this half double crochet row, or our first underarm row, just so it can match the stitch marker that we inserted into the other side. And now to get started on our decrease of 2 back loop slip stitches, insert your hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, into that next stitch's back loop, then yarn over and automatically pull through all 3 of those loops. Then from here, we're just going to continue to repeat these 2 previous rows. So a back loop half double crochet row that ends on a decrease of 3 back loop half doubles, and then a back loop slip stitch row that starts with a decrease of 2 back loop slip stitches. We are going to continue to repeat these 2 rows until we have the same amount of rows as our second underarm portion that we did on the other side. We should all end right after a half double crochet row, and then I'll meet you back so we can finish up our front panel with the rest of our underarm. Alrighty, so we are back. We have just finished up our first underarm portion. Now what we're going to do from here is finish up the rest of our underarm portion by mirroring the first underarm portion that we did. So how we're going to mirror it is do our falling row in our row sequence, which should be a slip stitch row for everyone. Now our falling slip stitch row isn't going to have any increases or decreases because we didn't have any on this side. So from here, chain 1, flip your work, put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Then at the end of the row, chain 2, flip your work, and then put 1 back loop half double crochet into every stitch, making your way back up, leaving the last 2 stitches so you can do a decrease of 2 together once more. So we are back. We have finished up our back loop slip stitch row with no increases and no decreases, then made our way all the way back up with our back loop half double crochet row, leaving the last 2 stitches. Now let's do our decrease together. We're all going to start by yarning over and inserting our hook into that first stitch's back loop, pull through, and into that next stitch's back loop, which should be the last stitch, pull through for 1, 2, 3, 4 loops on our hook, then yarn over, pull through all 4. Then from here, continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have the same amount of rows as the first underarm portion that we got started with. Everyone's last row should be a half double crochet row, and when we have that, I will meet you guys back. Alrighty, so we are back. The entirety of my front panel is completely finished. I have roughly 10.5 inches or 27 centimeters unstretched. And now we're going to repeat everything we did here for the back panel, but without the neckline, so I'm just going to talk you guys through it. So the back panel is going to be done pretty simple. We're all going to start by making a chain for the same amount of chains that we made as the front panel. Then we're all going to do the same exact underarm portion that we did for the front panel. Then once we have that, we're just going to work straight across with our back loop half double and back loop slip stitch rows with no increases and no decreases for the same amount of rows that we have from our first neckline row all the way across to our last neckline row. Then everyone's underarm portion will end the same way that the front panel's underarm ended. Then I will meet you guys back once we have the back panel all finished up so we can seam everything together. And we're going to want to make sure that we're inserting our stitch markers into the same side rows that we did for the front panel as well to make it easier for once we do our strap. Alrighty, so now that our front and back panel are all finished up, the next thing we're going to do is seam everything together. So first things first, we're going to place our front panel on top of our back panel, making sure that our work is flipped right side out, meaning all of the texture that we have for the front panel is faced up and all the texture that we have for the back panel is faced out. Then we're going to insert our hook into the bottom corner stitch of both the front and the back panel. Then we're going to do our outside loop slip stitch seam. So we're all going to start by pulling our yarn through and do a chain up of 1 to secure. Then to do our first seam, we're all going to start by finding that first stitch into the front panel and insert our hook only into that front loop. Then into the back panel, find that next stitch and insert only into that back loop. Then yarn over, pull through all 3 of those loops. Again, into that next stitch, insert only into that front loop within the front panel. Into that next stitch into the back panel, insert only into that back loop. Then yarn over and pull through all 3. And that's it. We're going to continue doing this, making our way all the way up. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then repeat everything we just did here on the other side. Alrighty, so now that everything is all seamed up, we're ready to get started on our strap. So what we're all going to do is make sure that our work is flipped right side out, meaning the seams that we just did is along the outside still because it looks like another slip stitch row. And now we're going to be inserting our hook into the side row that our stitch marker's in. And then we're all going to do a single crochet row. So we're all going to start by inserting our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 1 to secure. What we're going to do from here is 2 single crochets into every side half double crochet row and 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row. So to get this started, we're all going to start by finding our first side row, which should be a side half double crochet. We're going to find that top loop, insert your hook, and start with 1 single crochet, but since this is a side half double crochet row, we're going to be putting 1 more single crochet into that same top loop. So into that top loop again, insert with a second single crochet. So far we should have 2 single crochets. Into our following side row, this is mine. I'm going to find that top loop, which is a side slip stitch row for everyone. Insert with just 1 single crochet. Let's do this once more. This is my following side row. I'm going to find that top loop and insert with 2 single crochets. So there is 1 into that same top loop with a second. And then into our following side row, find that top loop, insert with just 1 single crochet because that is a side slip stitch row. From here, we're just going to continue doing this, making our way all the way down our underarm and then back up until we reach our stitch marker row on the other side. Once we're worked into that side row, do a chain up of 1 and cut, and then I will meet you back. Alrighty, so now that our single crochet row is complete, the next thing we're going to want to do is insert our stitch marker into any even numbered stitch right where we want the strap to start to separate, forming our armhole. So what I mean by that is we're going to try our piece on, making sure that everything is placed where you want it to fit. So that includes the neckline where you want that to sit as well. And then we're just going to insert our stitch marker into the stitch that's nearest to the front of our underarm. Now keeping in mind that if we insert our stitch marker higher, that gives us fewer rows to be connected into the piece, which is fine, but it will show just a little bit more skin, so it may show a little bit more of your underarm. So if you would like to avoid that look, go ahead and insert your stitch marker lower like I did. I inserted my stitch marker into the 10th stitch from the outer edge, and we want to make sure that we're doing the same thing on the other side as well to make sure that everything is even. Once we have this, we can get started on our strap, and our strap is going to start off of our piece, so we're going to put this away for now. Now getting started on our strap, no matter what size we're making, we're all going to start with a chain 1. Once we have our chain 1, we're going to block off that last chain and then do a chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a stitch for our following row, and then that second chain is going to count as our turning chain. Then from here, we're going to insert our hook into that second chain from our hook with a slip stitch. So into that second chain, we're going to insert, yarn over, and gently pull through everything on our hook. That is our first stitch for our row 1. We should all have 1 chain left. Into that chain, we're going to insert, yarn over, and pull through everything with a second slip stitch. So everyone's row 1 is complete, and we should all have 2 stitches. Let's do our row 2. we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 slip stitch into every stitch, which we should have 2 slip stitches, and they're going to be within the back loops. So into that first stitch, insert into that back loop, yarn over, pull through everything, and again into that following stitch, insert, yarn over, and pull through everything. Now our row 2 is complete, and we should all have 1, 2 stitches for our row 2. Now at the end of every even number row, we're all going to chain 2. That first chain is going to count as a first stitch for the following row. That second chain is going to count as our turning chain. That extra chain is going to be how we're going to increase and flip our work. From here, we're going to insert into that second chain from our hook's back loop. We're going to insert and then yarn over, pull through everything with another slip stitch. And then again into that following stitch, pull through everything. Into that following stitch again, insert, pull through everything. And now for our row 3, we should all have 1, 2, 3 stitches. Now just as a really quick tip, just to help us count, I do like to insert my stitch marker into this third row, just so I know where our row 3 is, because if we're trying to count our rows from the beginning, our first row may look a little squished, so we may have a different row count than what we need. And from here, it's just going to get started on our 2 previous rows, so let's just do the next set of rows together. We're about to get started on our row 4. So getting started on every even number row, we're going to chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So insert, pull through, into that next stitch, pull through, and since we just have 1 more stitch left, insert, pull through everything. For everyone's row 4, we should have 1, 2, 3 stitches. Now to get started on our row 5, we're going to start that row off with a chain 2 because we are going to be increasing into every odd number row. So we're going to chain 2. That first chain counts as a stitch. Second chain counts as our turning chain. Flip our work, and then into that second chain from our hook. Start with your first back loop slip stitch, and then continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. So basically, every odd number row should have 1 more additional stitch than our previous even number row. So everyone has just finished up our row 5. We should all have 1, 2, 3, 4 stitches for row 5. Now we're just going to continue to repeat those 2 rows until we have a portion that can reach from the middle of the base of our neck over to the top corner stitch of our front panel. Now this portion is going to be completely up to you. Keep in mind that 1, this does have a decent amount of stretch to it, so what I would suggest is once when you're measuring this up to yourselves, try your piece on. Then what you're going to do is place the first row that we made, so the tail end right at the middle of the base of our neck, and then just stretch it until this bottom corner stitch can reach the top corner stitch of our front panel's underarm. Now, I will meet you guys back once we all have an even number of rows so that we can work straight into the underarm portion from there, and then for the rest of our strap. Alrighty, so we are back. The first portion of my strap is complete. I have a total of 18 rows, and this is roughly 2.5 inches or 6 centimeters unstretched. Now we're going to connect it into the base. So how we're all going to do that is, since we should all be along the increase end, we are going to slip stitch into the top corner stitch of our front panel. So insert, yarn over, and pull through everything, and that's going to be how our strap is connected to the body. Then to get started on the following row, we're going to slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. So into there, we're going to insert, yarn over, and pull through everything, keeping in mind that none of those slip stitches worked into the base count as a stitch. That's just to connect. Now we're going to flip our work to work back up the strap. Alright, so I have flipped my work over, and now we're going to work our way up the strap, but we do want to keep up with the increases that we have along the bottom of our strap. So into that first stitch from our previous row, making sure we're not working into any of those slip stitches into the base, we're going to start with an increase of 2 back loop single crochets. And yes, I did say single crochets. We're doing single crochets because an increase of 2 back loop slip stitches can be a little bit messy, resulting in us losing some stitches, which is not what we want. And the back loop single crochets end up looking like the slip stitches anyways, so win-win. So all we're going to do is find the last stitch from our previous row. We're going to insert our hook into that back loop with 1 single crochet, and then into that same stitch for our second single crochet. Then the rest of our row is going to be per usual, so 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now at the end of the row, chain 1, flip your work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again, and I'll meet you back at the base. Alright, so we've just finished up our first strap row that's connected into the base, worked our way out. Then at the end of that row, did a chain 1, flipped our work, and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again. Now connecting it into the base is going to be fairly simple. And how we're going to connect it into the base is we're all going to start by finding that next stitch into the base, insert with a slip stitch. That slip stitch does not count as a stitch, that's just to connect it. And then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. That doesn't count as a stitch either, and flip our work. Now it's just going to be a repeat of our 2 previous rows until our last row is worked into our stitch marker stitch. So let's do this again. Finding that last stitch from our previous row, insert with 2 back loop single crochets. So there's 1, there is 2, and then 1 back loop slip stitch into the rest of our stitches. At the end of the row, chain 1, flip our work, 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch and connect it into the base the same way that we just did. I'll meet you back once we're worked into our stitch marker stitch so that we can finish up our strap. Alright, so we are back. We have made our way all the way down to our stitch marker stitch. Now from here, we're going to continue to repeat what we did up here, just working off of our piece until it can reach the outside of our arm. So let's just get started. On the following row, we all should have ended along the top. What we're going to do is chain 1, flip our work, and then put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch, and I'll meet you back at the end of the row. Alright, so we made our way all the way down. So just as a refresher, we're going to chain 2 to get started on the following row. Flip our work, slip stitch into that second chain from our hook, and then continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. We're just going to continue to work our way all the way up and continue to repeat our 2 previous rows until we have a portion that can now reach the outside of our arm. Now some tips for this portion. We do want to make sure that we're stretching it as if we're wearing it, and then once we reach the outside of our arm, we're going to do a chain up of 1 and cut. We can end on any number of rows. Then we're going to repeat everything we did here on the other side, and then we're going to seam it together. So I'll meet you back once we have both of our straps all completed. Alrighty, so we are back. We have just finished up the entirety of our strap on both sides, and now we're going to seam it up together. But just to let you guys know, I had a total of 46 rows on one side and then repeated the same exact thing on the other side. Now we're going to seam it up. So first things first, make sure that our work is flipped right side out, right side up, meaning the seam that we did for the sides is along the outside, and then we're going to do the same outside loop slip stitch seam. So we're all going to start by inserting our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, yarn over, pull through everything. Then we're all going to start by finding that first stitch into the front panel and insert only into that front loop. First stitch into the back panel, insert only into that back loop, pull through everything, and that's it. Since we already know how to do this, just continue doing this until we don't have any more stitches left to work into. Then repeat everything we just did here on the other side. Alright, so we are back. Both of the straps within the front and the back panel are all finished up. Now we're going to finish up with our collar. So first things first, make sure that our work is still flipped right side out, right side up. We're all going to want to make sure that we're looking at the back panel, and then we're all going to insert our hook into the corner stitch that we have into one of our straps. We are going to insert our yarn onto our hook, pull through, and do a chain up of 1 to secure. That does not count as a stitch. Now from here, we're going to be putting 1 single crochet into every stitch, working across the top of our strap. We should all have 2 stitches per strap that we have. So here's 1, here's 2, 1 single crochet is going to be worked into each. So into that first stitch, which should be the same stitch that our chain 1 is in. So insert with 1 single crochet, and then into that next, another single crochet. Now from here, we're going to be working across the back panel and connecting the other strap that we have. So this portion is going to be the same for everyone, no matter what size. We're all going to chain 1, grab our second strap, and then single crochet across the top of that one as well. So just insert your hook into the top of that first stitch on the other strap, and insert with 1 single crochet. Into the next with another single crochet. Now all together we should have 1, 2 stitches, our chain, and then another 2 stitches. Now from here, we're all going to make a chain that reaches up and over our shoulder that can reach the strap within the front panel. But as we're doing this, we are going to want to make sure that the total chain that we're going to make can fit around our head as well, because this is our neckline. So I have already measured mine out. I'm going to need to make a chain of 30, and that's roughly 7 inches or 18 centimeters. So now that we have made our chain, we're now going to connect it into the front panels. So I flip my work over. Now I'm taking a look at my front panel. I'm going to insert my hook into this top band, just like how we did for the back panel, and start with a single crochet. That's going to count as our first stitch and our connector. and then we should have another stitch as well. So insert into there with another single crochet. Now just like how we did for the back panel, in between our straps we're going to chain 1, grab our second strap, insert your hook into that corner stitch, and single crochet once. We should have one more available stitch, so single crochet into there as well. Then from here we're all going to make the same chain that we just made on this side. So for me, another chain 30, and then we're going to slip stitch into that chain space that we made when we got started on this row. Now as a really quick tip, when this following chain is completed and we have slip stitched into that chain space, we're going to want to try on our piece just to make sure that everything is fitting nicely. So basically just double checking to make sure that it fits around our head. Once we have the chain all finished up, I will meet you guys back. Alright, so we've made our way all the way around and this chain row is all complete. Now our following row is just going to be a single crochet row just to sturdy it up. So once we have slip stitched into that chain space, we're all going to chain 1 and put 1 single crochet into every stitch and chain, making your way all the way around. When we don't have any more chains left to work into, slip stitch into that chain space. Now a really quick tip is our following single crochet row is going to be as wide as this neckline can stretch. So once when the single crochet row is finished up, make sure you're trying on your piece just to make sure that everything is still fitting nicely. Once we have it all finished up, I'll meet you back so we can get started on the length of our mock neck. Alright, so our single crochet row is all finished up. Everything is fitting great. So now we're going to get started on the length of our mock neck. So we should have all slip stitched into that chain space. Once we do, we're all going to make a chain the length that we'd like for our mock neck to be, so you can make this as long or as short as you'd like. Now as you guys can see, I have already made my chain. I made a chain 8 and that's roughly 2 inches or 5 centimeters. Now from here, we're going to block off that last chain and do a chain 1. Now that chain 1 does not count as a stitch, that's our turning chain. Then we're all going to insert our hook into that chain that we blocked off, or the second chain from our hook, with a slip stitch. So insert and gently pull through everything on our hook. Then continue with 1 slip stitch into every chain. We've just put 1 slip stitch into every chain. Now we're going to connect it into the base. So what we're going to do is just find that following stitch into the base, insert your hook with a slip stitch, and that's it. Now getting started on the following row, we are going to need to work our way up to the following row. So slip stitch into that following stitch into the base. That slip stitch does not count as a stitch. Flip our work and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. Now at the end of this row, chain 1, flip our work and put 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch again, and I'll meet you back at the base once more. We are back and we should all have 1, 2, 3 rows nearly finished, and now we're going to slip stitch it into the base again. So just finding that next available stitch, we're going to insert, pull through to connect our row 3, then to work our way up to the following row, slip stitch into that following stitch into the base, flip our work and continue with 1 back loop slip stitch into every stitch. And that's it. From here, all we're going to do is continue to repeat our 2 previous rows with no increases and no decreases, making our way all the way around. When we don't have any more stitches left to work into, I'll meet you back so we can seam it all up together. Alrighty, so we are back. We've made our way all the way around with our back loop slip stitch rows. We don't have any more stitches left to work into, so now we're just going to seam it all up. And this is going to be an outside loop slip stitch seam, so the same exact seam that we've been doing for everything else. So just make sure that our work is slipped right side out, right side up. Then we're going to insert our hook into the corner stitch of both the front and the back panel, do our outside loop slip stitch seam, do a chain up 1 and cut when we don't have any more stitches left to work into, and then I'll meet you back. Alright, so we are back. We have just finished up seaming our collar, and now we're just going to clean everything up by single crocheting along the inside of our back cutout and our front cutout. So all we're going to do is insert our hook into that chain that we made that's in between our straps, insert your yarn onto your hook, pull through, do a chain up of 1 to secure, and now we're going to do our single crochet row. So working our way down, we have a bunch of side rows first. We're all going to start by putting 1 single crochet into every side row. So we're all going to start by finding our first side row. This is ours right here. Insert in through that top loop. And if you're like me, you have some tail ends and you don't wish to weave them in later, place them over your hook and single crochet around everything. Let's do that again. This is my following side row. I'm going to find that top loop and insert with 1 single crochet. And that's pretty much it. Just continue with 1 single crochet into every side row. Once we reach the top of our back panel or front panel, depending on which one you're working on first, we're going to be putting 2 single crochets in every side half double crochet row, 1 single crochet into every side slip stitch row, which we should already know how to do that. Just make your way all the way around. When we don't have any more stitches left, slip stitch into that chain space and then repeat on the other side. Alrighty, so we have just single crocheted along the cutout within the front and the back panel, and we're all done. Last thing we're gonna have to do is just weave in all of our ends. And there you have it. Hope y'all enjoyed the tutorial. Join us on Instagram, Pinterest, or Twitter. Those links are down below, and don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't already. Catch you on the next one. Bye!